Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Huntington. My name is Dennis Carr. I'm the Virginia Steele Scott Chief Curator of American Art here, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this exhibition, G's Bend, Shared Legacy, and the conversation with our curator, Lauren Cross, and Louisiana Bendolph, one of the artists whose work is featured in this exhibition. So, Louisiana, welcome. We're so happy that you're here to talk about your work and to talk about the community that brought forth this incredible quilt making tradition. It hit the kind of global art stage in about 20 years ago in exhibitions at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, later at the Whitney Museum and other museums around the United States. And I think for many visitors, that was the first time that they had seen quilts from G's Bend firsthand. And since then, it's become a sensation. And this show looks at what happened after that exhibition, and how different artists and quilt makers from G's Bend came into conversation with other artists, in this case, Paulson Fontaine Press. And it looks closely at how you translate an image from a three-dimensional quilt, that's a utilitarian object, to a two-dimensional print. So I hope we'll get into more depth. And leading this conversation will be Lauren Cross, the Gail Oxford Associate Curator of American Decorative Arts here at the Huntington, who is an expert in African American textile and quilt making traditions. I know Lauren has been to G's Bend, and among many things that she's done in her career, she was the producer of a documentary called The Skin Quilt Project that brought her into conversation with the quilt makers in G's Bend. So Lauren, thank you so much, and I'll hand the mic over to you.
Thank you, Dennis. And it's an honor to be in conversation with you. I learned as I was preparing for this talk that one of the quilters that I spoke with was actually your mother. And that just made our conversation even special to prepare for. So thank you, Louisiana, for being here with us today. It's just such an honor, seriously. So I wanted to begin our conversation by just talking a little bit about G's Bend and maybe some of your memories of growing up in G's Bend. So tell us a little bit about, G's Bend, where it is, and just your experience.
Oh, G's Bend is, well, you would have to say it's kind of close to Selma, because if I said anything else, you all probably wouldn't know where it's at. But you all have heard of Camden, Alabama. And it's a small community, which is still small. And, well, growing up there, we did a lot of farming. It was a farming community. And I was born in the 60s, and I tell people we picked a lot of cotton. We picked a lot of peas, okra, whatever you could think of, we did it. And even though we stopped farming cotton, I think we were one of the last two people that farmed cotton, and it was in the late 70s. And so I grew up there with my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather and my mom. And that's what our days were. They were cotton fields and whatever other kind of fields. Even in summertime, it was still working. And I tell people now I should have been retired when I was like 40, because I worked a long time in the fields.
So tell me about quilts. When were you first introduced to quilts and made your first quilt?
Well, I was young when I was first introduced, because I was, we always played under the quilt with my great-grandmother, and Mom was quilting because they was on a frame that was attached from the ceiling. And so it was dropped down, because back then it was like full frame, not like now. And we would play on the quilts and watch the needle go in and out, of the fabric. And then later on, when you got older, my mom, they said we needed to learn how to do it, so we had to.
And what style of quilting what was your first quilt style that you learned?
Based on a housetop, which is that one of those prints over there. That print, that's over there.
And can you describe like what, for those who may not understand the housetop quilt pattern, explain a little bit more about what that is?
Well, everybody know a log cabin, right? So it's basically like that. That's what it really based on. But people say it came from being able, well, one of the older ladies said it came from looking up through the roof of the house. Because, you know, you have the chimney in the middle and you got the wood going around it. So.
And who taught you how to quilt? Did you learn from watching someone else, or was it a family member?
Well, basically from watching my mom and my great-grandmother and my aunt.
And what was that process like, learning from your mom? Did you feel like a sense of like pride of like learning it from your mom, or was it like it's my mom and like?
No, I just, you know, back then I don't really think we really thought about it. The only thing I knew was I had to, and so it wasn't about being proud to do it. It wasn't even about thinking about what it meant at the time. It was just that it was something I had to do. It was another chore to do.
Right.
So.
And so when did it change from being a chore to an art form to you?
In 2002, when I went to Houston and saw my great-grandmother quilt hanging on the museum wall, I walked into the room and I saw her quilt. I saw my mother-in-law quilt. I saw all the older ladies of G's Bend quilts hanging on the wall. And yet still, to me, it was a quilt hanging on the wall. It wasn't about art, but it was about these older women that from my community, they had quilts hanging on the museum wall, which we didn't go and we don't do museums. We don't, you know, we didn't grow up going to museum. We didn't do none of that. So I take that back now, because they used to put the quilts on the line, and you know you would see them when you go around through the neighborhood. So I guess we did have an outdoors museum. I guess you know, think about it. But that made me go back to quilting. I really didn't want to then, but then they called me back. So.
And when you say they called you back, who was they?
The quilts did.
Oh, the quilts did.
The quilts did. Yeah, I didn't want to, because I tried not to, but I don't know. I started drawing on my way back, just on paper, and I started seeing the quilts, and so finally I just started jotting them down, drawing them on paper, and you know, because I wasn't going to do anything else, because I didn't want to do that anymore. And then, but they still didn't leave me alone, so I just started back to sewing again, and it just happened.
And what did that feel like when you kind of stopped quilting, and you were like, not gonna do that no more.
Yeah, I didn't need that.
Then you have this experience of seeing, you know, the women in your community, your family members, and then you kind of kick back into gear again. What did that feel like for you?
It still didn't feel like I needed to. It still didn't feel like I wanted to. And, you know, as we traveled a lot, and I got thrown into conversation a lot, and it was like, okay, one day I remember we had went on a trip. Can't remember exactly where it was, but anyway, I was sitting in the audience. I was feeling really great because I knew I didn't have to do anything, because it wasn't my quilt on the wall, so I didn't have to do anything. I was just, you know, along for the ride. And then this man named Matt Arnett, he decided that he was going to put me in the front on stage, and I'm like, how could you do this, you know? And there was all these older women up there that had all these great stories, and their quilt was on the wall. So why am I up here? And then so I said my name, and that was it.
And you've been talking ever since.
And I've been talking, traveling, And it it get hard to do it. And this is the first one I did in like 4 or 5 years, so it's even harder now. But what made me really start doing it and really start understanding it, it was about, okay, my great-grandmother didn't get to go anywhere. She had a stroke when she had a stroke, matter of fact, when she was a child, before my great-grandfather even married her. And his my mom told me the story about she was a sickly child, and so her father told my great-grandfather, "Are you really gonna marry her? Cause she's sickly." And he told her, yes, he was, because he loved her. And so she lived a long time. She had children. And then later on in life, in her early 60s, she had a stroke, and she wasn't able to do anything. And so my mom took care of us, and we was there taking care of her. And, and I could see her in the wheelchair, which she, like I said, didn't go places and stuff. And for me to be able to go and talk about her, talk about the other older women, it was like, how can I not? How can I not do it? How can I not honor the women that had worked hard in fields, and the thing that we used to make us warm, the thing that we had to do, and now here was something, rags, that people thought was works of art. And how can it, and stories was being told of things that we had never heard, things that we didn't ever think about. And now it's like, you can't stop thinking, you can't stop seeing their lives. Because like I say, I've seen a lot. I saw a lot, but I never really seen until all of this started happening. So,
one of your pieces in the show is called Share Legacy, and is actually part of the title of the exhibition. What does shared legacy mean to you? Maybe you can speak to the piece, but I want you to think a little broader. Like, what does that mean to be a part of a shared legacy to you?
It means that after all the talking, after all the seeing, I knew it was something I had inherited from my great-grandmother and I can't say my grandmother because she wasn't there, but my great-grandma and my mother and my aunts. And this was something they had shared with us. They had passed it down through generation. This was our inheritance. We often think of inheritance as money and all that stuff, but we never think about the stories that we inherit, and the way people did things. I never thought about how I would watch my great-grandfather. It wasn't just women artists, but I would watch my great-grandfather. He carved out things with a chisel and a knife. And matter of fact, he had made a whole set of rails for the front porch. And it's like, it was just a thing that was passed down. And I can look now at all the things that have been gone and pull out old things and look at her old quilts and touch pieces that, came from her. And people ask a lot, well, you all talk about the quilts and the quilt was so important to you. How could you let it go? But to me, if they wouldn't have let them go, then we wouldn't be here. The quilts wouldn't have been, well, still wouldn't be hanging on museum wall. They wouldn't be telling the story. And I think they really stayed alive and stayed together because it was waiting for this. And God had a plan. He knew that one day the world would need to know stories of being broken, being, losing things, and still being able to survive it, and still not being bitter, and still having joy in the midst of, of it all. So
That's beautiful. Yeah. And when I think about your work in particular, like one of the things that one of the first things that I did years ago beyond the Skin Quilt Project was I actually wrote a piece on your work for the Dallas Museum of Art years ago. And as I'm doing this research, I'm like, oh my God, this is the Louisiana again. And one of the things I learned about your work is so much of what you've done for the Housetop quilt in particular, and how you expanded that conversation. And oftentimes when I describe, like, well, what is G's Bend quilting? People often think about the Housetop quilt, but you've really done something inventive with that. Can you speak a little bit to what that means to you and kind of what you were thinking?
Well, I was thinking it's a new generation of housetop, but it's still what I was taught. And so I always want to have that. I always want to, I found that I don't need patterns to do what I want to do. I found that I can be free to create what I want. This person told me once, because everybody, would say how you dressed and you should do this and should do that. Then it was always like, this person said, well, you're an artist, so y'all can however you want to. And it's not about so much about, I'm glad people really don't change who they are. I mean, because my husband always say, you really should cover your gray. I say, you know what? I don't think so. I said, people can cover a lot of things, but why? If you cover up stuff, things that matter is on the inside, how you treat people, how you care for people, how you respect people. You see a lot of pretty things, but everything that's pretty don't work. So, I always want, and just like my quilts, they pretty, but there's a lot of stories behind them that I was thinking about that not so pretty, and because life happened, and there's never gonna be straight roads. I don't care what you do or how you plan them. It's still gonna be, and that's that. You sit there and you put points together. But why do that? I mean, because it's not gonna be good all the time. And sometimes you're gonna have to cut some corners and cut some rows, and you have to make them your own. You have to go back to. You always say, I don't care what you do, where you go. You always go back to where you came from. You go back to what made you who you are. Because that's the only way I think you'll stay true to yourself and understand it's about how you treat people.
That's good. When I think about so much of your practice, you talk about your memories and how you feed that into the work. Is there a particular memory that you might want to share?
No, it's so many. No, I'm gonna tell you like this. Okay. I sit, and I think of my mom. Y'all know I miss saying my grandmother taught us. So she was killed when my mom was 4. So sometimes I sit and I look at my mom and I watch her because she stitched every stitch by hand. She's 82. She stitched. And she get up faithfully every morning and go next door. And I sit down and I watch her and I watch how she, you know how somebody, you know how you love, your favorite food you love. She take every stitch with so much love because she have such a passion for it. I like it, but she love it. She, and to see her and to feel the pain of growing up without a mom, without her being talked about, because you know, like I said, they don't talk about stories. They don't talk about things like that hurt you, and my and it was something that the family never got over. So she's you know, I see her being a little girl, not even being able to see her grade because we don't even know where it's NG's been, but they never took her there. They never took us there. We don't, you know, and I see that, and I see her lifting my great grandmom because she had like I said, had a stroke, so she was the one that took care of her, and I see her with my great grandfather taking care of him, and then I look in books and see her quilts and see how much love she had for things and the way she took care of us, her 5 children, and you know, and I tell all the time, you know, you're strong and it just, you know, and that's what make me do the things I do, and you know, you can't help but think about it, and you think about other things that happen in your life, and yeah, and so at one point about maybe 5 or 6 years ago, one of my daughters was diagnosed with cancer, and so they said, okay, we need to take all the girls, and so then my oldest daughter went, then they found a lump in her breast, so it was so funny because when we went to the doctor's office, if they had an appointment at the same day with the same doctor, and so I was there, and they said, can you I said, can you put them both in the same room because they can't be, you know, in 2 different rooms. And so when they was dressed and they were sitting on the table, you know, had gotten in the gown, and so the doctor came in and she said, and she laughed, and she went back out the door because they were sitting up on the table and they were sitting there together, and they was, you know, and we were just sitting in the room. And so she walked back at the door and she laughed and she came back in. She said, I'm so sorry. I said, no. I said, that made our day because we was waiting to see if, you know, and then turns out one had cancer and one didn't. One had surgery to remove a lump on the 7th of July. The other one had her breast removed on the 13th of July. So I was in, you know, and so it's things like that, you know, you go through a dark period and things, you know, and it all reflects all of that, all about life and about having a way to, you know, just let it go.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oftentimes when I've talked to other quilters, they've talked about that meditative process and the healing process of quilting and how it's helped them, like emotionally, socially. How has quilting helped you in that way?
A lot, because like I said, that's how I would sit there and, you know, and say, you know, now I'm free, because that's what it was. It was just being free to do that, even though I was thinking about it. But I just like every stitch you make, you just give it up a little bit away, and you just get through it. And you know, I didn't used to think about that, but because my mom said, you know, I be stitching so much till I just think I stitched all my problems away. I say, yeah, you. I say, yeah. I believe. You know, truly believe it.
Yes.
And so.
So some people talk about quilts about, you know, how it's to keep your family warm, and then another side of it is like the artistic side. Some people may make quilts that are like the show quilts, the quilts that you put out when you're, you know, when you have special guests.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have kind of like two different types of quilts that you make, or is it all the same?
Well, they're all the same, except for the ones I made before I got married. They still use those, and my daughters, I say, you think that you want to put that quilt on your bed? She say, yep. She say, I'm gonna sleep on all of them, and that's what they do. They all sleep on their quilts because their grandmama pass them out. Like every time she make one, she said, hey, that's why she do it. She do it for her grandkids.
And one question that I had was, do you tend to sketch out your designs first, or is it purely improvisational?
The second one.
The second one?
Yeah, the second one. Like I said, I did it because I was trying not to sew then, but I don't do that. Yeah.
I would imagine that's more fun.
What, doing it?
Just, you know, that intuitive process.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, because basically you're doing what you want to do. And so, and then if not, you can still do it at the end. Yeah, so a quilt is never finished until you say it's done. You know, I had, one had been quilted all the way, and I really just didn't like it. It was missing something. And so I just went back in and sewed another piece in. Because it didn't work for me. So
each person has their own style and influences. I wonder, like, what would you like people to take away when they come to see the show? What would you like people to understand about G's Bend? The traditions, the different traditions that you learned and that you've made your own. What would you like others to like take away and think about in regards to the legacy, the shared legacy?
Well, think about, I don't know, maybe think more about their life and the legacy that they share, that they pass on. Because we all have a legacy, and it's kind of up to us to decide which one we need to pass on and which one we should just leave behind. And so, because kids don't understand, they don't understand if your grandmother sit there and read you a story, they don't understand how important that is. They don't. If grandmom goes in the kitchen, she have this favorite cake that nobody else baked. That's your legacy, because she can pass it on to you. So it's all about something good that we can pass on. Even when you don't think it's good, sometimes it is good. Yeah.
That's absolutely amazing. And you were amazing.